Now, with great pleasure, I would like to introduce our today's speaker, Ms. Sharanya Chattopadhyay Mukherjee. Sharanya Chattopadhyay Mukherjee is currently a research scholar in the School of Rural Development, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TISS Maharashtra. As a visiting fellow, she is also associated with Water Policy Center, which is an independent research think tank established in 2014. She pursued her MSc in Environmental Management from University of Kalyani, West Bengal. Her dissertation was focused on assessment of pollution status and ecological degradation of River Saraswati, West Bengal. She is a first class first in MPhil in Rural Development from TISS Maharashtra, and her thesis was titled as Understanding Climate Change Induced Slow Onset Disasters and Livelihood Vulnerability, a case study of Sundarban region, West Bengal, India. She is a recipient of ICSSR Centrally Funded Doctoral Fellowship 2019-20 and TISS Young Researchers Grant 2018. In the research domain, she has been working on issues of water security, sustainable development, disaster management, rural livelihood, natural resource governance, ecosystem services, and policy implications since 2014. Her main focus area is Indian Sundarban Delta region. Sharanya is actively engaged in field research and several advocacy organizations of Sundarbans. She was invited in National Youth Conference in Mangalore, Karnataka as a panelist in the session Climate Change Too Hot to Handle. She received Best Paper Award for the paper titled Life Around Embankment, Erosion, Embankment and Livelihood in the 7th International Conference on Sustainability, Indian Institute Management, Shillong, India. Currently, she is actively engaged in an action-based course on the global food, energy, and water nexus. In collaboration with Cornell University, USA, TISS India, Nanjing Agricultural University, and China Agricultural University, China. With all this experience in her research kitty, Sharanya, a second generation IRSA member, is going to take us on a journey of the forest and folklores, the waterscape of Sundarbans. I'm sure we are all in for a magnificent voyage through the mesmerizing realm of Sundarbans. Just a few instructions to the dear participants for a smooth running of this webinar. Please do not click on the present now icon. Please post your questions in the IRSA Garden chat box. Please mute the audio and switch off the video button. It will save the bandwidth and help the speaker. Use of earphones and headphones recommended. Sharanya, now the virtual stage is all yours. Please start presenting.
Thank you, everyone. Firstly, it's a huge pleasure to be here and to get the opportunity to present my research topic. The way I explore Sundarban, I will try to take you all in a voyage so that you can see Sundarban through my eyes, probably. So I will start presenting. Hope you really enjoy it. Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Okay. So uh, this presentation of mine, as I named it as Forest and Folklore, the Waterscape of Sundarbans. So, firstly, the point is when we talk about a waterscape, so what is a waterscape? So, waterscape is any landscape where a large expanse of water is the dominant feature, and this water body or this large expanse of water in the form of maybe ocean, sea, or a river system uh, somehow influences all other perspectives or all other aspects of that land area. So in that in that matter, I have
Thank you. But initially it was not like this. ये ऐसा था
no.
सब details.
Please, please mute your.
Yeah.
Get back in.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Hello?
Thank you.
Hello, please mute your video.
This every Wednesday there is gas. No. So
Uh,
Sorry,
So,
sorry.
no, it's fine. So, in that matter, the point is, in the waterscape of Sundarban, this section, I will start with the evolution of the delta, how the whole Sundarban delta was evolved, and what happened afterwards, historically what happened, and how people started inhabiting the islands, and what happened to the settlers, and I will also talk about the flora and fauna of Sundarban. So, located at the northern apex of the Bay of Bengal, this Ganga Brahmaputra Delta is the world's largest delta, both in terms of the land area and also in terms of the total sediment discharge. And it also has a total combined catchment area of around 1.6 million square kilometer, which is huge. So, in the early stages of development in the history, we get that the entire Bengal basin was submerged under the sea, and the sedimentation from the mighty rivers Ganges and Brahmaputra, these river systems, they created a landmass, which is the present Bengal Delta. Now, historically, it's found that the present form was, it took its present form in the late Holocene. But before that, what happened, we can see that this tidal deposition happened and slowly the landmass area, the land area, it was emerging above the low tide line. So when it started emerging, slowly the wild grass, it started colonizing the muddy, these tidal flats. So we are talking about long, long back, and at that point of time, definitely there was no human habitation. So the biotidal, this accretional process, it induced further sedimentation, and with time, it reduced the tidal inundation time. So when the tidal inundation time was reduced, then slowly the non-mangrove vegetation community started evolving. And initially, we get that from the data or the historical accounts of Sundarban, there were lots of non-mangrove plants in the northern fringe areas of the current Sundarban area. But nearly 1,000 years ago, there was a change, and due to tectonic activities, the Bengal basin it tilted eastwards toward the Bangladesh. And then what happened? Due to the saline water ingress, slowly there was a saline water environment was created, and the creation of the saline water environment actually helped in flourishing the current flora and fauna of Sundarban, these salt-resistant varieties of plants and the saline environment of current Sundarban. So what I get is the Indian Sundarban is a smaller part of the Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna Delta, popularly known as the GBM Delta. And the 40% of the mangrove forest area is covered by water, so it makes the largest mangrove wetland of the world. So ecologically and geographically, this area is very distinctly featured, I can say. Now, where to find the Sundarbans? So, it's the smaller part of the main Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna Delta area, and it's the largest contiguous mangrove forested delta of the world. And there are lots of innumerable creeks and river systems, and there are 102 islands in the Indian part of Sundarban, and there are a lot more in the Bangladesh part. But in my presentation, I will talk about the Indian part of the Sundarban, or popularly known as ISD, Indian Sundarban Delta area. So we see that it's bounded by the Ichamati Rayamangal River in the east, by the Hooghly River in the west, and Bay of Bengal in the south, and the Dampier Hodges line was drawn in the 1829 in the north. So it was drawn during the British era, and it was drawn mostly because of the revenue issues, and I will come into this matter later on. So what happened that if you see the globe on top of this slide, you can see that in the north of the India, there is no other landmass. So any cyclonic activity or any storm that's formed in the Bay of Bengal or in the Indian Ocean essentially impacts the Sundarban directly, and it has got an immense impact on the ecology and the geography and the people of Sundarban. Now, moving to the next slide, this picture on top, you can see that there is a green line demarcated, and this green line was drawn in the 1776. And at that point of time, that was the boundary of the Sundarban forested area. And later on, it started decreasing. And the greatest degradation of the forest area in Sundarban it occurred during the period of British rule in India. And after the Great Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British East India Company, they actually set up their headquarters in Kolkata, which was at the edge of Sundarban, and now it's almost 110 kilometers away from the southern tip of Sundarban. So at that point of time, actually, this area was surveyed by the Surveyor General, and later on, this whole area was given for lease, and mostly for the land reclamation started for cultivation and timber supply, and the main goal was on revenue generation, and it caused major deforestation and in this Sundarban area, and it caused major habitat fragmentation at that point of time also. In the lower part, there is another picture. This picture actually depicts the current Sundarban Biosphere Reserve area, which was created in the 1970s by the Ministry of Environment and Forest, the Government of India. They actually adopted the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program, and that point of time, this Biosphere Reserve was created, and the northern territory of the Biosphere Reserve was demarcated by the earlier mentioned Dampier-Hodges line, and this includes approximately 4,000 square kilometer of the reserve forest area, and also 40% of the area has been declared as protected area. So this is the whole structure of Sundarban Biosphere Reserve. And we all know that due to various natural causes or anthropogenic causes, like the sea level rise is there, increasing salinity is there, whenever there is a cyclone in the Bay of Bengal or in the Indian Ocean, it directly hits Sundarban first. And unlike the oceanic currents along the Netherlands coast, in the Sundarban coastline, the oceanic current, it hits it directly. It doesn't flow along the coastline. It directly hits it perpendicularly. So it causes a great amount of coastal erosion in these areas. So for several issues, you can see that there is a picture on the top left corner, which is the salinity of Sundarban's wet period, and these red areas, these have high salinity in the wet period, and the right upside of that there is another picture. It shows it's all red marked. So this is the highest salinity during the dry period. So you can see that these islands, they are highly saline. They have saline water and also high soil salinity. So it creates lots of issues regarding the agricultural practices of these regions. And below there is another picture. It shows all the islands of Sundarban. It's not so clear, but you can see the red marks. So these red marked areas are facing coastal erosion, and the green marked areas are experiencing accretion. So when there are so many islands in Sundarban which are shrinking in size, and the population there, they are being forced to evacuate the islands. So this is the, if you consider the physical aspect of Sundarban, this is the situation in Sundarban. So when we are talking about the waterscape of Sundarban, then there are so many other aspects. One is the physical aspect, we already talked about it, and then we'll talk about the biological aspect of Sundarban, and then we'll come into the socio-economic and cultural aspect, where I will mostly highlight the folklore of Sundarban and how it impacts their livelihoods and the ecology. So it is a World Heritage Site, a biosphere reserve, and a Ramsar site. So it's well understandable that some area with such a, such feathers in its cap is bound to draw major attention globally from all the scientists and the media, but mostly because of its ecological or geographical uniqueness. So what happened that the estuarine wetlands of the Sundarban, they are constantly fed by nutrients brought in by the fresh water of Ganges and Brahmaputra river system we already seen. So this river system plays a major role, and there are also coastal, these tidal waves that come from the southern areas. So these two wave system of these two water systems actually influence the whole biological landscape of Sundarban, and this actually promote a complex interdependency, and it supports a diverse population of plants and animal species. So, if we see that this mangrove, we call it mangrove. So, it occurs in the equatorial, tropical, or subtropical regions, and intersection of land and sea. But in terms of Sundarban, it's characterized by adaptation to high water stress, fluctuations in temperature, extreme salinity. But in Sundarban context, historically, there are so many changes happening, and as it is an active delta, there are so many changes happening till now. So all these factors actually influence the mangrove population in the forested area and also the fauna of Sundarban, both in the marine fauna and in the rivers and also in the forested stretches. So this is the flora of Sundarban that I was talking about. And the sella in this intertidal, this hydrological system, which provides a foundation for a very highly productive and dynamic rich biodiversity or ecosystem, and it provides habitat for a wide range of species. We see the Sundari, the heritage of forest. This is it's called that the name Sundarban has been derived from the tree which is named Sundari. So a forest of Sundari trees is called Sundarban. And then there is another tree which is called Kakra. And there is this Golpata. This Golpata or Nipa fruticans, it's a major attraction in Sundarbans. And there is Khalsi. This Khalsi tree, this tree is very important in terms of the honey collectors, because the honey collectors, they prefer the Khalsi trees. And there is Keora and Gewa. And so now all these trees, they have different flowering times and they have different fruit ripening times that we are seeing in the right corner. So depending on the water salinity and the freshwater flow, all these plants have different type of location in the Sundarban area. So when we are talking about the northeast corner of Sundarban towards the Bangladesh side, there the freshwater inflow is much higher, and there we see large stretches of Sundari tree and Kakra and Gewa. But when we are moving towards the southern part of the Sundarban, towards the sea, naturally there are so many events, so major fluctuations in the salinity, and the Gewa is the dominant woody species there. And when we are moving towards the newly created mud flats or the narrow creeks of Sundarban, we see that Golpata or Keora is prevalent in these stretches. So, moving towards the fauna of Sundarban, the Royal Bengal tiger, it's a major tourist attraction in Sundarban. And other than that, there are almost 450 species of vertebrate wildlife in Sundarban. But when we are talking about wildlife, we mostly focus on the higher taxa. So I mostly focus on the higher taxa. So we see that the Royal Bengal tiger is there. This Crocodylus porosus, it's still there, and whenever there is a boat moving through the narrow creeks of Sundarban, this Crocodylus porosus, it's a common sight for them, but tiger is not so common. It's there, but spotting it is a difficult thing, and it's a challenging task. So in Sundarban, the southern areas of Sundarban, there is a grassland forest mosaic, and this type of mosaic is crucial for spotted deer. And there are so many spotted deer found in Sundarban. And interestingly, this spotted deer actually is a major form of biomass for the tiger's diet. Almost 80% of the tiger's diet, it comes from the spotted deers. And the both male and female tigers, they use scratching to mark their territories, and in the forested lands, it's a common sight. But interestingly, what happens? They always prefer the trees with soft bark rather than the trees with rough bark. So when you're talking about ecosystem conservation or the ecological conservations, it's very important to maintain the trees with rough bark and the trees with soft bark, because sometimes we see that the larger trees get the major attentions, not the smaller ones. And then again, the spotted deers, the wild boar, or the rhesus macaque, the macaca mulatta, they actually comprise 95% of the biomass consumed by tigers in the Sundarban. So any major change in that number actually triggers a major change in the tiger population or their breeding in Sundarban area. And among the wildlife of Sundarban, at least 4 species have become extinct since the beginning of the 20th century. The Javan rhinoceros or wild water buffaloes, swamp deer, hog deer. Previously, all these species were found in Sundarban, but due to habitat fragmentation and later on, after the commission of the Farakka barrage, there were lots of changes and it changed the freshwater inflow and eventually it changed the composition of the fauna in Sundarbans. And we see the Irrawaddy dolphin and the Gangetic dolphin. The Gangetic dolphins, these numbers are dwindling because of the higher salinity, the increasing salinity in the waters of Sundarban. So moving towards, there are lots of other globally threatened species that find extensive habitats in Sundarban tract. Is river terrapin or olive turtle, fishing cat. This fishing cat, this is called the baghrol, and it's the state animal of West Bengal. And sadly, unfortunately, I must say that there is a major hunting going on regarding this baghrol or the fishing cats. But these animals are found in Sundarban tract quite extensively into the forested areas. So moving to the socio-economic landscape, because when we're talking about the waterscape, we are talking about the people, and we see that the total population of Sundarban Biosphere Reserve, this whole area in the Indian Sundarban side, it's almost 4.5 million. So 4.5 million people actually stay there in these forested lands. So in the map, we can see that all this color, these islands, all these are habited by these 4.5 million people. And all these people, due to lack of other alternative livelihood options or due to lack of industries in that area, they are in a large majority dependent on the forest resources. And compared to the West Bengal average or the India average, in the Sundarban, the percentage of people living below poverty line is also very high. There are almost 38% people living below poverty line in Indian Sundarban. So all these people, they are somehow dependent on the forest resources. And we all know that mangroves are immensely productive ecosystems, and they actually provide a huge number of benefits, such as employment, income, or food security in the form of fuels or fisheries or honey, etc. And they also provide a major base for tourism. So, also in terms of the climate regulation or transportation, combating cyclones or tidal boosts, these mangroves they play a very significant role. So now it's quite understandable that the conservation and management efforts in the Sundarban are mostly geared towards the protection of biodiversity or the habitat of animals and plants. But interestingly, what happened in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005, there was a study and it actually showed that from data of 17 countries, almost 22 to 25% of the people are actually dependent on forest resources in the forested areas. And all these, in terms of all these dependencies, are not accounted in the national statistics. So these things are not included in the national statistics. So basically, we don't know how these people are dependent on the forest. And if we restrict their access to forest, how it can influence their livelihoods or their lives. We till now, in a global scale, we do not have sufficient data to support that argument. So what happened? All these pictures, these are taken by me in the Sundarban during my fieldwork days. You can see that these people living there, they are already living in a very fragile system, and these people, if you see these are the embankments, these are broken embankments. Water flows freely into the villages, and it stays inundated. The saline water inundation happens, and it wreaks havoc in the agricultural practices or the agricultural fields, and for years or months the fields are left unproductive. And these are the houses, it's actually their home. I don't know if you can call it home, but these are their homes, and this is the water source, the tube wells. So when the waves come during the high tides, actually these tube wells, they get inundated. and that's how people live in the Sundarbans. Okay, that's how these are the settlers, these are the islanders we are talking about. Now, the people in the forest, there are different kinds of livelihood. In Sundarban, we see that fishing, transit, and shrimp fry collection. A large number of people are involved in that. And then there are non-timber forest product, NTFP collection. And then there are wood collections, the woodcutters. They also venture into the forest areas. So I will mostly focus on the forested areas and how their livelihood depends on the forest. So on average, there are 200 quintals of honey, both from wild and beehive boxes, as well as 1,000 kg of wax collected every year from Sundarban. It's old data, 2011, the number now increased. I didn't get the new data. The estimated crab landing is also very high, and this crab landing for the crab collection, actually they have to venture into the forested islands or the narrow creeks in search of crabs. And there are over 32,000 households in the Sundarban directly dependent on forest regularly for various purposes. So these many people are directly involved in activities that involve forest. Somehow they have to venture into the forest for their daily lives. In their daily lives, they venture into the forest. Now, the story of Bonbibi. So when I first read about Sundarban, when I first came to know about the Bonbibi, a deity which is equally worshipped by the Hindus and the Muslims of Sundarban, uh, I was kind of intrigued to know more about it. So there is Bonbibi Jahurnama and Bonbibi Keramati. These two narratives are there. These two in these two writings, we actually get the reference of Bonbibi. Now, who is this Bonbibi? These are the pictures of Bonbibi. Now, who is this Bonbibi? So the devotional story of Bonbibi is one of that finds present in the ancient sacred text of Sundarban. So all these stories were written in the 19th century. Now, according to the story, the Born Bibi is the daughter of Ibrahim, a fakir from Makkah, and Gola Bibi. Now, according to the narrative, God himself decided to send Born Bibi and her younger brother, Shah Jangali, from heaven for a divine mission. So, what happened then? Now, interestingly, the God instructed them to take birth as the children of Gola Bibi. So once, along with their parents, this Bon Bibi and Shah Jangali, they were worshipping somewhere in Makkah in a mosque of the Prophet Islam. Now they received two magical hats. It sounds pretty interesting, but with the help of these magical hats, they flew to the country of 18 tides. In Bengali, it's called Atharo Bhatir Desh. Now, Sundarban is called the Atharo Bhatir Desh, the country of 18 tides. So when they arrived in Sundarban, this Bon Bibi along with her brother, Sundarban was under the control of the demon king Dakhin Rai. Now, Dakhin Rai was a tyrant zamindar of that area, according to the stories, and using his mystical powers, he was able to take different forms, primarily that of a tiger, and he used to prey on the inhabitants of the Sundarban, and he never granted access in the forests. Now, when Bonbibi came to know about this matter, there was a huge fight between Bonbibi and Dakhin Rai's mother, Narayani Devi, because Narayani Devi decided that it's better to fight a woman. I mean, Dakhin Rai wanted to fight Bonbibi, but Narayani Devi said, no, I will go and I will fight with Bonbibi. So, along with her huge force of goblins and hosts, she went on and there was a huge fight, and Bon Bibi ultimately defeated Narayani Devi, and they became friends now. And Bon Bibi decided that she won't kill Dakhin Rai. But there was a deal that while the inhabited part of the Sundarban is believed as the realm of Ban Bibi, Dakhin Rai is believed as the ruler of the deep forest. So there was a deal that Dakhin Rai won't kill the settlers or the islanders, and the islanders will follow some particular rules, and only then they are allowed to venture into the forest. And interestingly, till now, the wood collectors or the honey collectors of Sundarban who have to venture into the forest, they actually follow these rules and regulations. They also talk about Bon Bibi. So amidst the labyrinth of the Sundarban these are the pictures of the honey collectors. They are called the moles. So these people enter the forest between the months of April and June when fishing is prohibited. So there is a fishing ban because that is the fish breeding season. So during that time, these people they venture into the forest and they have to leave the safety of their boats. They have to harvest honey from the beehives and make their way back home. So during those times, they actually venture into the forest and they worship the bone baby. In this picture, you see there is a small shrine amidst the forest, and such shrines are quite prevalent in Sundarban. Before entering the forest, they worship them, they offer the offerings or bhog, and then only they enter the forest. Now, these people, the traditional rites or the traditional methods of forest resource collection, these are derived from the indigenous knowledge, the traditional cultural practices, or beliefs, or the histories, or philosophies, and the customary the uses of forest resources. They actually ensure the the sustainable use of the mangrove resources because they say these people actually say that only be instructed them not to, I mean, they have to follow certain rules. What are the rules? What are the rules they are talking about? So they have to follow the norms like access to forest areas. They do not extract more than what you need. There is no mention of greed. You cannot be greedy inside the forest. You just have what you need. And then you have to enter the forest during certain hours of the day and refrain from entering at night because you cannot agitate the wildlife and you are refrain from defecating or smoking within the forest. You cannot disobey the rules. And then you have to enter the forest in clean hands. This clean hands means without any arms. You cannot be armed because if you are armed, then you actually deny Bonvidi's instructions, and there is a chance that you will be killed by the tigers. These are the beliefs these people have. And if you see the sustainable this development goals, they actually talk about this minimal use. They are talking about the sustainable use, the resource use. So they somehow resonate with those ideas. Now, the methods and techniques that they evolve, these people evolved over the ages, are not tightly commercially focused, but they follow certain rules that they cut only a piece out of the beehive. They do not damage the whole portion of it. They ensure that bees could make a return to their home. They do not damage the areas where the queen bee lives. So they also apply they use smoke, but they do not use petrol or kerosene. They use these fire torches made by hepal leaves. So they do not pollute the forest that much. And also they talk about that when the woodcutters venture into the forest, they try to cut the trees which are grown up enough. They do not harm the smaller ones, the budding ones. They do not do that because the Bonbibi asked them not to harm the forest. She taught them to live in harmony, and both the Hindus and Muslims they believe that. So these are the photos where you can see that these are the fishing boats, and these people they were actually mending the net. And this lady down there, she is collecting the seedlings. This prawn, we all talk about the shrimps or the prawn seedlings, fry collection. So the women of Sundarban, they are actively engaged in these tasks. They actually do it day and night. At the middle of the night, maybe they leave their houses and for 10, 12 hours, they went to the west deep of water and they collect the prawn seedlings. So that's how basically they live and that's how they abide by the rules of Bondibu. Now, in recent few months during the lockdown, there were so many reports of man and tiger conflict. It happened in Sundarban. I mean, we see that during the 2000 to 2009, the annual average was 22 to 23. But in 2010 and 2019, 8 or 9 people died due to tiger attack. But this year, in 2020, till September, there was 20 reported deaths. And the problem with Sundarban is due to the restrictions of the forest department, all these people, if you are a woodcutter or a honey collector or crab catcher, you need to have a permit from the forest department, only then you can venture into the sea. But sometimes what happens due to hunger, these people without the permit they venture into the sea. venturing to the sea for fishing or venturing to the forest for anti collections. So it's very difficult to get hold of the actual data, the actual casualty. But as the number already reached 20 till September 2020, the reported dates, the villagers say that it's much higher than that. It's an alarming situation. So why it's happening? It's a major issue because due to the lockdown, people lost their jobs. They do not have the options of alternative livelihoods. So people are being forced to venture into the forest, and those people who have never ventured into the forest, they do not have any experience. They do not know how to do it. Just because of hunger, they are being forced to move into the forest areas, and they do not know how to save themselves, and they are being getting killed by the tigers. So lots of research and lots of fieldwork is going on, and there are so many awareness programs or campaigns going on in the villages so that people refrain from doing so. But that's how things are shaping up in Sundarban. Because when we talk about Sundarban, we all talk about the forest resources, the animals, these magnificent animals. But there are these people living there alongside. This coexistence, it's very unique in the Sundarban context. So we look forward to explore more, and it gives a very fascinating story that these people living there along with tiger, their own stories, their own belief systems. Even now, those Hindus and Muslims, they are worshipping one deity, that one deity. She will save them all. Uh, it's mind-boggling for me. So I won't take much time. I'll stop here. Thank you for listening, and questions are welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharanya. That was a very intriguing talk. You have actually taken us on a voyage, showing us the evolution, the science, geography, ecology, everything about Sundarbans. And it's very interesting. It is the world's largest mangrove delta. You are indeed a very good storyteller. We hope we see few books written by you to read more about Sundarbans.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So, yeah, we now open up for the question and answer session.
Okay, sure.
Okay. The first question is by Dr. Sunita Mahajan. What is Portesia coerta?
Okay, that is the wild grass variety of Sundarban.
Okay.
This is a type of wild grass. It actually colonized Sundarban earlier, and it's
Okay.
still found inside the forested areas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, ma'am.
Uh, just a minute. Yeah, many people have actually congratulated and said it was very informative. Especially the story of Bonnie was very interesting.
Yeah, actually, when I first learned about Bon Bibi, I was intrigued myself that even now in today's world, they are actually worshipping that lady. I don't know if they actually believe it, or that belief maybe kept them alive in the forested areas, that kept them alive, that gave them strength to venture into the forest, which is a good thing from them.
Right. Uh, the next question is from Baku ma'am. Okay. And she says, does climate change threaten the very existence of Sundarbans?
Yes, ma'am, that's a very important question. Climate change indeed is threatening Sundarban because, as I already said, that all these people living there, they are dependent on agriculture or fisheries. Now, we all know that climate change has a major impact on the agricultural productivity and the fisheries. So, these people are losing their livelihood, and also due to climate change, the numbers of cyclones, the frequency and the intensity, it has increased. So that increase also impacted Sundarban directly. And then again, there is sea level rise. These are already active delta region. So delta building process is going on. So these people are losing land, and they do not basically have any idea where to move to. They do not have any idea. So climate change is a major problem in Sundarban, along with other problems.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sharanya. The next question is by Dr. Surekha Jingde. The question is, do the inhabitants of Sundarban eat any other animal from the Sundarbans other than fish?
Okay, they actually have crabs, lots of fishes, and these prawn seedlings that they collect, they also consume prawns if they can get from the sea. And they are not that much into the forest products other than these things. I mean, they have their own poultries or they have their home gardens, so they opt for that.
Okay. Next question is by Dhanashree Patil. She asked, any tourism project, ongoing tourism project?
Yeah, ecotourism projects. There are so many ecotourism projects, and there is lots of debate regarding these ecotourism projects in Sundarban. I mean, definitely ecotourism projects are good for the settlers if it can help them revive their local economy. But so many times, what happens that the tourists, the us, we venture into the forest and within 5 to 10 minutes we lose interest because we couldn't spot a tiger. Then we start shouting, making noise, polluting the environment. So there are so many environmentalists who are saying that we need to have ecotourism projects, but we need to have aware tourists. We need to make them aware of the system. Maybe we should have more regulations in that matter.
Okay. Next question is by Dr. Padmaji. What are the approaches taken to save the endangered ecosystem?
Okay, ma'am. To save the endangered ecosystem, it's already a part of Man and Biosphere program. So there are so many rules and regulations because it's a protected area. There's a and biosphere reserve. So they have their own certain rules and regulations. The forest department, they have floating checkposts in the waters of Sundarban to refrain the villagers and the illegal people, all the poachers, to enter the forest. So poaching is not a major problem in Sundarban, at least in terms of tigers. But the spotted deers are easy to spot, and in some portions, in some stretches, they are being killed. The numbers are definitely reduced because of the awareness or the activities of the forest department. So the ecosystem in terms of the animals, it's not threatened because of the anthropogenic activities. But due to climate change, there is a change in the salinity, which is changing the distribution of the species. So right now, I don't know if there is anything that we can do from the scientists' part. The study is going on because in the forest, what is being seen that there is a change. They are very adaptable and they have the adaptive capacity. So they are changing. They are moving towards different regions. It's happening in Sundarban.
Okay. Next question is by Shri Rupa ma'am. She asked, once the salinity sets in, how long does it take to get rid of that?
Uh, I can say during the cyclone Ayla, during Cyclone Ayla, there are so many villages which went underwater. And after that, almost for 5 to 6 years, there was no cultivation, no agriculture in those villages. Till now, after 11 years of Ayla, there are some stretches which are unproductive or saline to some extent. So it really depends, and it depends on the you know the quantity of water, the level of the groundwater, and the methods or means opted by the villagers or the government in that matter. But it takes time. At least 5 6 years it takes.
Okay. Regarding the climate change question, Papu ma'am has, asked one more question. Will the inhabitants be equivalent to the Rohingyas of Myanmar?
Okay, this is a very good question. I mean, maybe not equivalent to Rohingyas because they are international immigrants, but these people they are moving. There is a major mobility, human mobility uh, in Sundarban, but these people are moving towards Kolkata or other major cities. They are not moving towards Bangladesh simply because uh, India has better resources or better opportunities for them. So whenever there is migration happening, people move towards better opportunities. For that very reason, they are not moving towards Bangladesh, but they are moving towards other Indian cities. But internal migration will also be a problem because our government, central and state governments, we are not well equipped to handle internal migration either. We do not have any policy for internal migration, and we still do not consider environmental refugees as refugees, and we do not have anything on them. So we need something. Works are going on. There are so many advocacy groups which are talking about it, how to move them to safer regions. Not like Rohingyas, but it will be a major issue in coming decades or days.
Okay.
I got so many beautiful questions. I am so happy to answer them all.
Yeah. If any of the participants would like to ask more questions, you can please unmute and ask your questions to Sharanya. I hope we can take more questions, Sharanya.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
Sharanya, can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Totally audible.
What about the Nate tiger population, Royal Bengal tigers? Is it declining?
No, it's not declining. Initially, a few years back, it was declining, but now it has increased. And we can say that the experts are saying that tigers are quite safe in Sundarban. That's not an issue in Sundarban. I don't remember the exact number of tiger population in Sundarban, the recent data. But what I remember is tigers are safe in Sundarban.
Yeah, but you said that one BB rule is that they cannot take any weapon while collecting honey, etc. Correct?
They usually do not take weapons.
But then
Okay,
it will
and
be a
I
one-way
have
traffic.
no.
It will be
What
a one-way
happens?
traffic.
No. What happens that when these people they venture into the forest, the moles or the honey collectors, they actually use a mask, and they am I visible?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so they actually use the mask backwards. So this is my face. So they tie the mask from this side. So when they are working, the tiger is confused. Which one is the front side? So there is a face on your back side as well. So if that happens, the tiger gets confused, and it's a foolproof method for them. And when they are in larger groups, usually people venture into the forest in like at least 8 or 10 people in a group, and they move together. So there is a very lesser chance of tiger attack because if there are so many people, they don't usually attack. But nowadays, what happens? They do not form such groups. Maybe 3 or 4 people they are venturing into the sea, and they are trying to get more resources in a short period of time, a short span of time. And inside the forest, they are going different ways. It's almost like okay, we are going north, you two go south. So if that happens, then they are becoming easy prey for the tigers because you see the numbers actually reduced. I mean, it was 6 or 7 annual average, which is pretty low in terms of Sundarban, where people are living so close to the jungle. But that's the problem now. We have to somehow stop them from going into the forest in that processes of them.
Sharon, is there a book on Born Baby or can we get some writer because the story is very interesting?
I can share some articles or some stories about BB in the group. Okay, so in the user group, I'll share the links or the PDFs. Would that
Yeah.
be fine?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Yes. Any more questions?
Hello, no question, but Sharanya, your lecture was really fascinating. I'm Bhaktava Mahajan. I think perhaps you should tell our audience who also seem to be very much enthralled by your talk and your journey to Sundarbans to read Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry
Hungry
Tide.
Tide.
So that will give them a very good perspective of life in Sundarbans and the way he has narrated the whole ecology plus the human angle, romance, etc. So just I think my friends there in ISA and everyone should read that book. I have that book. Incidentally, if anyone wants to read it, please take it from me.
Sure, Baku. I would like to read it.
These days, not many.
Okay, there's one more question in the chat box. It is from Dr. Surekha Jingde. Is there infrastructure for schools for the children, or they have to move out of towns and villages close by?
No, they have schools there. They have secondary, even higher secondary schools in the villages. So people actually live there. They have their schools, small hospitals, or the health centers. The things are there, and things are slowly developing. Earlier, maybe 2-3 years back, they didn't have electricity connection. So they had the solar lamps. Until now, there are so many villages that do not have direct electricity connections. They have solar lamps, or they are being given solar lamps, and they didn't have proper roads. But now things are developing here, and they are getting these benefits, these very basic necessities of life. They are slowly enjoying these things. So things will improve, but it will take time.
Okay, so I think the questions, there are not much questions in the chat box. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Please unmute yourself. Okay, I think there are more. So everybody is thank you. Thank you, Sharanya. You have patiently answered all the questions and you have cleared all our doubts. All the best for your future projects. Your work is really inspiring. Please continue doing it.
No, I thank you all for this opportunity, because initially I was confused, and then I thought that I will take you all into a voyage with me. The way I explore Sundarban, I will let you all see Sundarban through my eyes, because that's why I use the pictures. That's why I use the photographs as a means of storytelling. Thank you all.
Yeah, you have a request from Dr. Shamla Bhardwaj. She's the editor of IVSA newsletter, and she has said you can write an article on Bon BB for our IVSA newsletter. She has sent the email. We'll forward it to you, or you can forward it to Dr. Shrirupa ma'am.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, sure. I'll do it. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Sharanya, once again. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I now also thank the technical team, Vijaya ma'am, Tripta ma'am, Shrirupa ma'am, Vinny ma'am, Suparna ma'am, Ambika ma'am, Dipti ma'am, and Priya ma'am for taking efforts and organizing such a wonderful webinar on such an interesting topic. I now request Dr. Madhu Pava ma'am, Joint Secretary of IVSA, to say a few words for Sharanya in her own style.
Thank you, Sweden. I'm only Mrs. Madhu Power. Thank you. I got additionally. Ananya, Sharanya, it was excellent. As pretty as you. So, few lines for you. सुख आराम की राह छोड़ जिसने अग्निपथ चुना, निरंतर परिश्रम कर जिसने अपने स्वप्न को सच बुना, सब कुछ छोड़ कुछ निश्चय कर लक्ष्य को साकार किया, हुए वही जगत में यशस्वी और स्वयं का उद्धार किया। पल पल अपने स्वप्नों को जो स्वयं में जी पाता है, अपनी दृष्टि और सोच को जो लक्ष्य नहीं डिगाता है। प्रेम भाव रखे सबसे, सर्वहित हेतु प्रयास करे, ऐसा मानुष ही सदा सफल जग को राह दिखाता है।